Chapter 1. The Ancient Breath, Part I. The Finding. The Sound of Silence. The world did not begin with a bang, nor a whisper. For Kai, it began with the rhythmic, guttural thrum of the Pacific Ocean hitting the basalt cliffs of the archipelago. It was a sound that lived inside her bones, a constant vibration that made the teacups in her father's kitchen rattle ever so slightly at 4 in the morning. Kai was 11 years old, but her eyes held the depth of someone who had watched 1,000 sunsets and understood each one. She lived on the edge of a world that was moving too fast, while the rest of the island began to sprout concrete hotels and the frantic energy of tourism. Kai lived in the slow. She lived in the space between the tides. Her house was a fragile thing, held together by salt-crusted nails and the stubborn will of her father, a man whose hands were permanently stained with the silver scales of ahi and the dark ink of the sea. They didn't have much, but they had the porch. And from that porch, Kai watched the loop. To her, the loop was the mechanical repetition of the waves, but also the repetition of human life. People came to the beach, they laughed, they left, and they changed nothing. She felt a profound loneliness, not because she was alone, but because she felt she was waiting for a signal that no one else could hear. The gift of the storm. It happened after the great swell of February. A storm had torn through the channel, bringing with it winds that screamed like banshees and waves that looked like falling mountains. For 3 days, the ocean was a forbidden zone, a chaotic mess of brown foam and uprooted trees. When the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold, Kai went to the shore. The beach was unrecognizable. It was littered with the debris of the deep, shattered coral, tangled nets, and strange, smooth stones. And there, wedged between 2 black volcanic rocks, was the board. It didn't look like much at first. It was a long, dark slab covered in barnacles and gray silt. But as Kai knelt beside it, the wind suddenly died down. The air became unnaturally still. She reached out, her small, calloused fingers trembling, and brushed away the sand. Underneath the grime was wood the color of a dark sunset. Koa. This wasn't a surfboard made in a factory. This was a piece of a tree that had seen centuries. It was an alea. As she hauled it out of the rocks, surprised by its density and the strange warmth it radiated, she felt a flash of a memory that wasn't hers. She saw men with skin the color of polished mahogany chanting to the sea. She heard the rhythmic thwack of stone adzes carving wood. She felt the scent of burnt lime and coconut oil. The board was heavy, nearly twice her height, with no fins to guide it. It was a primitive tool of pure faith. "You found me," she whispered, her voice lost in the wind. "Or did you bring me here?" The gateway to 1920. Kai didn't just walk into the water that day. She stepped through a tear in time. As the salt water reached her ankles, the modern world began to blur. The distant sound of car engines replaced by the barking of dogs and the rhythmic beating of kapa cloth. The horizon line sharpened. The water turned a shade of blue, so pure it looked like liquid sapphire. She began to paddle. It was hard. Without a modern board's buoyancy, she felt every muscle in her shoulders protest. The Alea wanted to sink, to return to the depths. "Work with me," she hissed, digging her palms into the water. Then she saw him, a mile out, where the waves broke in long, majestic lines that seemed to go on for miles. A figure stood. He wasn't just riding a wave, he was presiding over it. He was massive, his chest as wide as a sailing mast, his skin glowing like bronze under the tropical sun. He rode a board so large it looked like a small boat, yet he moved with the lightness of a dragonfly. Duke. He wasn't the Duke from the history books, the man in the suit, or the aging hero. This was Duke in his prime, the king of Waikiki. He saw her, and instead of a look of confusion, he gave her a nod that felt like an anchor. "The wood has a long memory, Kai," he called out, his voice carrying over the roar of the surf without effort. "But it has been waiting for someone with your heart to wake it up." Chapter 1. The Ancient Breath, Part II. The Ambassador's Shadow. The weight of the koa. Kai paddled, her chin inches above the dark koa wood. The board felt like a living thing beneath her, unforgiving, heavy, and ancient. Unlike the foam boards she had seen others use, this Alea held the vibration of the earth. It was a bridge between the forest, where the tree had once stood, and the salt desert she was now crossing. She watched Duke. He sat on his olo board, a 16-foot masterpiece of solid wood. He was the descendant of chiefs, a man whose lineage traced back to the very first people to touch this sand. To the world, Duke Kahanamoku would become a symbol, a bronze statue, a name on a trophy. But here, in the swell of 1920, he was simply the ambassador of Aloha. "You paddle with your arms, little one," Duke said as she finally reached the lineup, her lungs burning like they were filled with hot coals. "But the ocean does not care about your muscles. It cares about your rhythm." He swung his massive legs into the water. He didn't look tired. He looked as though he were part of the current itself, the history of a king. "Do you know why we surf, Kai?" Duke asked. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the horizon, reading the subtle shifts in the clouds that spoke of a coming set. "To be free," Kai whispered, catching her breath. "Freedom is a consequence," Duke replied. "The reason is connection. My people, the Kanaka Maoli, we did not see the ocean as a barrier. It was our highway, our temple, our pantry. When I was a boy, my grandfather told me that the water has a memory. It remembers the stars that guided our canoes. It remembers the prayers of the kahunas." He leaned back, his eyes misting over with the weight of his own story. Duke's life was a bridge between two worlds. He had seen the monarchy of Hawaii fall. He had seen his culture pushed to the edges of the sand. He had been a man who shattered world records in the Olympic pools of Stockholm and Antwerp. Yet, when he returned to the mainland of America, He was often denied service in restaurants because of the color of his skin. The world is a hard place, Duke continued, his voice dropping to a low rumble. They will try to put you in a box. They will tell you what a girl can do, what a person with your skin can do, what a person with no money can do. But here, he gestured to the vast, shimmering expanse of the Pacific. The ocean does not know your name. It does not know your bank account. It only knows if you are honest. The rescue of the soul. Kai watched his hands, huge, powerful hands that had once pulled 8 drowning men from the wreckage of a capsized boat in Newport Beach. In 1925, a fishing vessel had been hammered by a freak swell. While others stood on the shore paralyzed by fear, Duke had grabbed his board and paddled into the mouth of the beast. 3 times he went out. 3 times he returned with dying men clinging to his wood. When I paddled that day, Duke said, sensing her thoughts, I wasn't a hero. I was just a brother. That is the secret of the water. If you see yourself as separate from the wave, you will drown. If you see the wave as yourself, you will fly. The physics of faith. The horizon began to sharpen. A series of larger waves was marching in from the deep. The water changed from turquoise to a bruised, heavy indigo. Now, Duke commanded. His relaxed posture vanished. He became a predator of grace. The Alea has no fin, Kai. It has no rudder to guide it. You cannot force it to turn. You must use the edge. You must use your soul. In the 1920s, there were no leashes. If you lost your board, you swam. If the board hit you, it could break your ribs. It was a sport of absolute consequence. Turn your wood, Duke shouted. Feel the swell lifting the tail. Don't look at the beach. Look at where you want to be. Kai turned. The wave was a wall of glass, 10 feet high and growing. It felt like a skyscraper was collapsing behind her. The roar was deafening, 1,000 lions screaming in unison. She dug her hands into the water, her small body straining against the inertia of the heavy koa wood. Paddle, paddle for your ancestors. Duke's voice echoed through the spray. The first glide. Suddenly, the world went silent. The frantic splashing stopped. The weight of the board vanished. Kai felt the lift. The back of the board rose, and for a terrifying second, she was looking straight down into a canyon of moving water. She popped up. Her feet found the waxless, oiled surface of the wood. She wasn't standing, she was hovering. Because the Alea was thin and finless, it didn't slice through the water, it planed on top of it. She felt the incredible speed, a raw, frictionless slide that modern boards would never truly replicate. She was vibrating at the same frequency as the Pacific. To her left, Duke appeared. He was riding his massive board with his arms crossed over his chest, a picture of ultimate serenity. He looked at her and smiled a smile that contained all the aloha of a vanishing world. You are breathing, Kai, he laughed. You are finally breathing. For 100 yards, they rode together, the little girl from the future and the ghost of the past. The spray was like diamonds hitting her face. The sun was a crown of fire. In that moment, the loop was broken. There was no yesterday, no tomorrow, no chores, no loneliness. There was only the now. As the wave finally exhaled and dissipated into a field of white foam, Kai stepped off into the waist-deep water. She was trembling, not from cold, but from the electricity of the experience. Duke paddled over, his dark eyes shining. That was the first breath, Kai. But the ocean has many lessons. You have learned to share the water. Next, you must learn to find the silence. He began to fade, his image shimmering like a heat haze over the sand. Go to the North Shore. Look for the man who lives in the eye of the storm. Look for the pipe. Chapter 2. The Art of Flow, Gerry Lopez. The transition from gold to gunmetal. As Kai stepped off the wave with Duke, the warm, golden light of 1920s Waikiki didn't just fade, it dissolved. The air grew cooler, sharper, smelling of damp tropical ferns and heavy rain. The gentle lap of the turquoise shallows was replaced by a low-frequency rumble that vibrated in her diaphragm. She was no longer on a gentle beach. She was on the North Shore of Oahu, 1974. The sand here was coarser, the color of raw sugar. The sky was a dramatic theater of charcoal clouds and sudden, piercing shafts of sunlight. And the ocean had turned into a monster. This was Pipeline. Gone was the heavy, dark koa board. In her hands, Kai now felt something light, needle-sharp, and painted in vibrant, psychedelic tints of red and yellow. It was a bolt board, a high-performance gun designed for one thing only: to survive the most dangerous wave on Earth. The eye of the storm, a few yards away, sitting calmly on a similar board, was a man who looked like he was meditating in a cathedral. He was slight of build compared to Duke, with a mustache, long dark hair tucked behind his ears, and eyes that seemed to see right through the chaos of the crashing surf. Gerry Lopez. While other surfers on the beach looked tense, their muscles knotted with adrenaline, Gerry looked liquid. The ocean is shouting today, isn't it? Gerry said, his voice a calm breeze in the middle of a gale. He didn't look at Kai. He was watching the horizon with a predatory stillness. It's terrifying, Kai admitted, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Fear is just energy, Kai, Gerry replied, finally turning his gaze toward her. If you fight it, it becomes a wall. If you breathe into it, it becomes fuel. Most people think surfing Pipeline is about strength. It's not. It's about the flow, the philosophy of the tube. Gerry pointed toward the reef, where a massive, 12-foot wall of water was pitching forward, creating a perfect, terrifying cylinder of spinning energy. In there, Gerry whispered, time stops. The loop you talk about. It doesn't exist inside the tube. You are in the present moment because the past and the future will kill you if you think about them. You have to be completely now. He began to paddle, not with the raw power of Duke, but with a rhythmic, cat-like efficiency. Kai followed, her bolt board slicing through the choppy surface. Pipeline is a mirror, Jerry called back over the roar. If your mind is cluttered, the wave will be cluttered. If your soul is quiet, the wave becomes a temple. You don't ride the wave, Kai. You let the wave ride you. The leap of faith. A massive peak rose up, casting a shadow that turned the water beneath them black. This is yours, Jerry commanded. Don't look at the bottom. Look at the exit. Find the silence in the center of the noise. Kai turned. The drop was vertical. It felt like falling off a building. For a split second, her mind screamed at her to pull back, to retreat to the safety of the shore. But she remembered Jerry's eyes. She breathed. She popped up. The board locked into the face of the wave. Suddenly, a roof of water arched over her head. The sunlight turned a deep, crystalline green. The sound of the world vanished, replaced by a strange, hollow hiss, the sound of 1,000 gallons of water spinning in a perfect circle. She was in the green room. She saw Jerry watching her from the shoulder, his hands joined in a subtle gesture of peace. In that tube, Kai understood, mastery isn't about control. It's about surrender. Chapter 2, The Art of Flow, Part II, The Zen of the North Shore. The architecture of the peak. The North Shore of Oahu in the mid-70s was a place of raw, unbridled energy. The air smelled of wood smoke, cheap wax, and the electric ozone that rises when the ocean is being torn apart by the wind. It was a frontier. There were no grandstands here, no jerseys, no colorful flags, only the raw confrontation between the human spirit and the crushing weight of the Pacific. Kai felt the difference in her soul. If Waikiki with Duke was a gentle introduction to the family of the sea, Pipeline with Jerry was an initiation into its temple of shadows. She looked at the wave again. It was a terrifying architecture of moving water. The peak at Pipeline doesn't just roll, it erupts. The water is sucked off the shallow, jagged lava reef with such force that the sea level actually drops before the wave pitches. It creates a vacuum, a hollow throat that seems to growl as it prepares to swallow anything in its path. The stillness within the storm. Watch my breath, Kai, Jerry said. He sat on his board, his back straight, his shoulders relaxed, as if he were sitting in a garden in Maui, rather than at the edge of a liquid abyss. Kai noticed that even as the massive swells approached, Jerry's breathing never quickened. It was a slow, rhythmic expansion of the diaphragm. Inhale, exhale. People think the challenge is the wave, Jerry murmured, his voice cutting through the roar of the surf like a silver needle through heavy fabric. But the challenge is the self. The wave is just a mirror. If you bring your fear here, the wave will feed on it. If you bring your ego, the wave will crush it. You must become like the water to ride the water. Jerry began to tell her about his path. He spoke of his early days, of the struggle to find a way to ride a wave that everyone said was impossible. He talked about yoga. At the time, Surfers were seen as rebels, outcasts, and beach bums. But Jerry was a monk of the tide. He had realized that to stay calm in the impact zone, he had to master the inner zone. Surfing is a moving meditation, he explained. When I am inside the tube, I am not thinking about the next turn. I am not thinking about who is watching from the beach. I am not thinking about the loop of my life. I am simply being. The moment you think about the exit, you lose the present. And the present is all we have. The alchemy of the bolt. He patted his board, the iconic lightning bolt. It was a weapon of precision. In the old days with Duke, the boards were heavy, made to glide on the water. But here, we need to go into the water. This board is an extension of my nervous system. It's narrow, it's fast, and it's designed to lock into the curl, that sweet spot where the gravity of the earth and the energy of the ocean meet. He looked at Kai's board. Your board is light because your spirit must be light. Don't fight the rail. Don't fight the drop. Surrender to the fall. The descent into the Emerald Cathedral. A set arrived that silenced the entire lineup. It was a second reef, swell waves, that broke far out at sea before doubling in size as they hit the inner reef. The first two waves passed, mountains of moving sapphire. This one, Jerry said, a slight, knowing smile touching his lips. This is your breath, Kai. Kai turned her board. She felt the massive surge of energy lifting the tail of her craft. The horizon disappeared, replaced by a wall of water that looked like a sheet of moving glass. She paddled 3 deep, purposeful strokes. Then the floor dropped out. It was a free fall. For a heartbeat, Kai was weightless, suspended in the air as the board accelerated to a speed that made her eyes water. She bottom turned, driving her rail into the base of the wave. Suddenly, the world changed. The lip of the wave threw itself over her head. The sky vanished. She was encased in a spinning cylinder of green light. The noise of the outside whirled the wind, the shouts. The crashing was replaced by a surreal, muffled hum. It was the sound of the green room. Inside the tube, time stretched like a piece of warm wax. She saw the individual ripples on the face of the wave. She saw the spit, the mist of compressed air being blown out of the end of the tunnel. She felt a profound, crystalline clarity. Jerry was right. There was no past. There was no future. There was only the edge of her board and the spinning wall of the Pacific. She emerged from the tube into the blinding sunlight, exhilarated, her soul vibrating at a frequency she had never known. She looked back and saw Jerry gliding out of a tube twice as large, his arms down by his sides, a picture of ultimate Zen, the lesson of the flow. They paddled back out as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long, dramatic shadows over the palms of the North Shore. You found it, Jerry said softly as they sat together in the fading light. The flow. It's not just for surfing, Kai. It's for everything. When the world gets loud, when the loop tries to pull you back into the noise, you must find that green room inside yourself, that place where you are centered, where you are quiet, and where you simply allow the energy to pass through you. He looked at the darkening horizon. But remember, the flow is gentle, yet it can move mountains. Now, you must learn about strength. You must learn about the fire that burns in the heart of those who refuse to be told no. The scenery began to shift again. The lush greens of Hawaii started to fade into the rugged limestone cliffs of Australia. The warm air turned brisk and salty. Go to the south, Jerry's voice echoed as he vanished into the mist. Look for the woman who surfs with the heart of a lioness. Look for the bell. Chapter 3. The Power of Will Lane Beachley. The Great Southern Shift. The humid, floral air of Hawaii vanished in a heartbeat. Kai felt a sudden, sharp chill that bit into her skin like 1,000 tiny needles. The scent was no longer plumeria and sweet rot. It was the cold, iron-rich smell of the Southern Ocean, bracing, salty, and ancient. She was standing on a wooden staircase carved into a towering limestone cliff. Below her, the ocean was a deep, bruised purple, marching in long, organized lines of power toward a cobblestone point. This was Bell's Beach, Australia, 1998. The sky was a vast, sprawling canopy of gray and pale blue, stretching toward Antarctica. The wind didn't just blow, it howled, whipping the spray off the tops of the waves in long, white streamers called flags. In her hands, her board had changed again. It was sleek, narrow, and built for speed, but it felt solid, designed to hold a line in the massive, shifting faces of the Victorian coast. The lioness of the Southern Cross, standing at the railing next to her, was a woman with a gaze so focused it could have pierced the fog. Her hair was pulled back, her jaw set in a line of absolute determination. Lane Beachley. At this moment in history, Lane wasn't just a surfer, she was a force of nature. She was on her way to becoming the greatest female surfer of all time, eventually claiming 7 world titles. But her path hadn't been paved with roses. It had been carved out of rock. "It's cold, isn't it?" Lane said, her voice carrying a sharp, Australian resonance that matched the landscape. She didn't look at Kai. Her eyes were locked on the bowl, the section of the wave where the most power concentrated. "It feels heavy," Kai replied, shivering in the brisk wind. "The Southern Ocean is heavy," Lane agreed. "It doesn't have the warmth of the tropics to hide its teeth. Here, the ocean doesn't welcome you. You have to earn your place. You have to take it." The anatomy of defiance. Lane turned to Kai, and for the first time, Kai saw the fire in her eyes. It was a different kind of light than Duke's warmth or Jerry's peace. This was the fire of will. "They told me I couldn't do it, Kai," Lane said, leaning against the cold railing. "The doctors told me I was too sick when I had chronic fatigue. The sponsors told me there was no money in women's surfing. The men in the lineup told me to go back to the beach. They all had a loop for me, a neat little circle of no and not yet. She gestured toward the thundering waves. But the ocean doesn't care about their opinions. The wave doesn't know if you're a man or a woman, rich or poor. It only knows if you have the heart to drop in. I decided that my will was stronger than their walls. I decided to be undeniable. The battle of bells. They descended the stairs. The sound of the waves growing into a rhythmic boom that shook the very earth beneath their feet. The water was freezing, a sharp, electric shock that made Kai's lungs contract. Paddle, Lane commanded as they hit the water. Don't let the current take you. You dictate where you go. The paddle out was a war of attrition. Huge walls of white water tried to push them back toward the rocks. Kai's shoulders screamed. The cold seeped into her joints, and for a moment, the loop of her own doubt whispered, "You aren't strong enough. You don't belong in this power." "Look at me," Lane shouted, her arms cutting through the water like pistons. When the wave pushes, you push back harder. Your body will tell you to quit long before your spirit is finished. Master your mind, and the body will follow. The ride of the conqueror. A massive set rose from the deep, groomed by the offshore wind into a perfect, terrifying amphitheater of water. "This is the one, Kai," Lane cried out. "This is for every time someone told you no. Take the drop." Kai turned. This wasn't a tube-like pipeline. It was a vast, open face of moving energy, 10 feet high and 100 yards long. She paddled with a ferocity she didn't know she possessed. She felt the power of the Southern Ocean lift her, trying to buck her off like a wild horse. She popped up. The wind tried to push her board back up the face, but she leaned forward, driving her weight into the turn. She carved a massive arc across the face of the wave, the spray flying behind her like the mane of a lion. For a moment, she wasn't a small girl. She was a giant. She was powerful. She was breaking every cycle of hesitation that had ever held her back. Lane was on the wave behind her, throwing a massive turn that sent a fan of water 20 feet into the air. As they kicked out into the channel, Lane paddled over, her face flushed with the thrill of the ride. "That," Lane said, "is how you break the loop. You don't wait for the world to change. You change your will, and the world has no choice but to follow." The lesson of the lioness. As the sun began to sink behind the cliffs of Bell's Beach, casting long, golden shadows over the cold Victorian water, Kai felt a new kind of strength. It wasn't the calm of the Zen master. It was the grit of the warrior. "You have the heart, Kai," Lane said, her voice softening as the adrenaline faded. "But strength alone can become brittle. To be truly great, you must learn to evolve. You must learn to see the patterns before they happen." Lane looked toward the north, toward a future that was already arriving. "Go to the island of fire. Look for the man who sees the ocean as a mathematical equation and a playground of the gods. Look for the king." The cliffs of Australia began to shimmer, and dissolve, replaced by the scent of volcanic rock and the hum of high-performance technology. Chapter 4. The Infinite Adaptability, Kelly Slater. The Geometric Silence. The rugged, salt-sprayed cliffs of Australia didn't just fade, they were digitally deconstructed. The roar of the Southern Ocean was replaced by a strange, rhythmic hum, a mechanical pulse that sounded like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Kai opened her eyes to a world of impossible perfection. She was no longer in the wild. She was at the Surf Ranch, 2018. Before her lay a long, narrow basin of water, a mirror-flat canal that stretched for hundreds of yards. The air was still, smelling of fresh water and scorched earth. There were no clouds, no unpredictable winds, and no wait for the ocean to decide its mood. Here, the wave was a choice. In her hands, her board was a marvel of carbon fiber and epoxy. It was feather-light, almost nervous, responding to the slightest twitch of her fingers. It was a tool designed for a world where every millimeter mattered. The architect of excellence, sitting on the edge of the concrete pier, tossing a pebble into the still water, was a man who seemed to be composed of pure focus. Even in repose, he looked like he was calculating the trajectory of a planet. Kelly Slater. He was the king. 11 world titles. A career that spanned generations. He had beaten the legends of the 80s, the icons of the 90s, and was still the man to beat in the new millennium. But as Kai approached, she didn't see a king. She saw a scientist of the soul. "It's perfect, isn't it?" Kelly said, without turning around. His voice was soft, precise, yet filled with an underlying intensity. No tide, no wind, just the physics of the energy moving through the medium. "It doesn't feel like the ocean," Kai said, looking at the stillness. "It's not," Kelly replied, standing up. "It's a laboratory. Out there in the wild, the ocean is a conversation. Here, the wave is a question. And the question is always, how much can you change?" The philosophy of the infinite. Kelly walked with her toward the water. He didn't speak of strength or zen. He spoke of adaptability. The biggest loop people fall into, Kai, is the loop of their own success, Kelly explained. They find a way to do something well, and they stop growing. They become statues. But a statue can't surf. To stay on top for 30 years, I had to kill my old self every single season. I had to unlearn everything I knew about my equipment, my diet, and my turns. If you aren't evolving, you're already gone. He looked at the long, empty canal. Most surfers want the wave to fit them. I want to fit the wave. I want to be the water that fills the cup. To be unstoppable, you must be infinitely adaptable. The machine awakens. A siren wailed, a haunting, industrial sound that echoed across the valley. At the far end of the basin, a massive metal plow began to move. It tore through the water, creating a wake that transformed, with mathematical precision, into a perfect, barreling wave. "Watch," Kelly said. He didn't just paddle, he launched. As the wave surged past the pier, Kelly was already standing. He wasn't just riding, he was dissecting. He moved with a speed that defied the eye, carving lines that looked like lightning strikes. He would disappear into a tube that lasted for 30 seconds, then emerged to fly 5 feet into the air, spinning like a top before landing back in the transition. "Now you," he shouted from the shoulder as he finished his ride, his breath as steady as if he had just walked across a room. The pressure of perfection, Kai paddled into the path of the mechanical giant. There was no feel for the swell here, only the relentless approach of the machine. The wave was flawless. Every curve, every lip, every pocket was exactly where it was supposed to be. This was the ultimate test of her mind. In the wild, you can blame the wind or a bad section for a mistake. Here, there were no excuses. If you failed, it was because you failed to adapt. She popped up. The wave was fast, much faster than it looked from the shore. She felt the board vibrating under her feet. For a second, the loop of her own inadequacy returned. You can't keep up. The technology is too much. The perfection is too high. Don't fight the machine. Kelly's voice rang out from the side. Become the gear, adjust, now. Kai shifted her weight. She moved her back foot just an inch to the right. She leaned into the curve. Suddenly, the board locked in. She began to dance. She wasn't thinking about how to surf. She was reacting to the feedback of the water. She carved. She sped up. She slowed down. She was no longer a passenger. She was the pilot of her own evolution. The lesson of the king. As the wave finally dissipated at the end of the track, leaving the water once again in its eerie, flat silence, Kai felt a different kind of exhaustion. This wasn't the physical burn of Australia or the spiritual depth of Hawaii. This was mental clarity. "You adjusted," Kelly said, paddling over to her. "You didn't try to ride it like Duke's Alea or Jerry's Bolt. You recognized the new reality, and you changed yourself to meet it. That is the only way to stay in the game, Kai. The world will always change. The technology will change. The waves will change. But if you are the master of change itself, you are the master of everything." He looked at her, his eyes sharp and analytical. "You have the will, you have the flow, you have the heart, but you are still missing the deepest connection. You are still looking at the wave from the outside." Kelly pointed toward the setting sun, toward a place where the mountains meet the sea in a crown of mist. "Go to the garden. Look for the man who doesn't just ride the wave, but who knows its secrets before it is even born. Look for the one they call John John." The high-tech basin began to dissolve into a lush, green wilderness. The hum of the machine turned into the melodic song of tropical birds. Chapter 5. The Wisdom of the Ocean, John Florence. The return to the Mana. The mechanical hum of the surf ranch didn't just fade. It was swallowed by the raw, organic roar of a living ocean. The air lost its sterile, inland stillness and became heavy with the scent of wild ginger, damp basalt, and the massive, salty spray of the Pacific. Kai opened her eyes to the North Shore, 2024. This wasn't the vintage sepia of Duke's 1920s, nor the psychedelic grit of Jerry's 1970s. This was the present. The colors were hypervivid. The water was a deep, electric cobalt, and the sand was a brilliant bone white. In her hands, the board was a masterpiece of modern fluid dynamics, light as a feather, yet incredibly strong. But as she looked at the horizon, she realized that no amount of technology could protect her here. The waves at log cabins were shifting, unpredictable, and possessed an almost sentient power. The son of the reef, sitting out past the impact zone, watching the horizon with the casual ease of someone sitting on their front porch, was a man who seemed to be vibrating at the same frequency as the water. John Florence, while Kelly Slater looked like a scientist calculating the wave, John looked like he was listening to it. He grew up here, in a house just steps away from the sand. He hadn't learned the ocean, he had been marinated in it. "You're looking for the patterns, aren't you?" John asked as Kai paddled up, her arms already beginning to ache from the heavy current. He didn't look at her. He was watching a small flock of birds diving half a mile out at sea. "I'm trying to understand where they break," Kai said, wiping the salt from her eyes. "But it keeps changing." "That's because it's not a machine," John said, his voice quiet and humble. "The ocean doesn't have a schedule. It has a mood. If you try to calculate it, you'll always be a second late. You have to learn to feel the pulse before the wave even appears." The language of the deep. John pointed to the far horizon, where nothing but a slight darkening of the water was visible to the untrained eye. "Look there," he whispered. "See the way the light reflects off that ripple. That's not just wind. That's the energy of a storm 3,000 miles away hitting the outer reef. It's telling us what's coming in 10 minutes. Most surfers look at the lip of the wave. You have to look at the everything." He spoke to her about his life, not about the world titles or the fame, but about his days spent sailing across the Pacific, away from the crowds and the cameras. He talked about how, when you are 1,000 miles from land, the ocean becomes your only teacher. "People talk about the loop as something to escape," John said, finally turning his blue eyes toward her. "But the ocean is the ultimate loop. The water evaporates, it becomes clouds, it rains, it flows back to the sea. The swell travels for days, it breaks, it returns. To have mana isn't to be stronger than the ocean. It's to realize you are a part of that cycle. You aren't riding the infinite. You are the infinite." The dance of intuition. The birds he had been watching suddenly scattered. The darkening on the horizon grew into a massive, jagged ridge of water. "This is a big one," John said, his posture shifting from relaxed to focused in a heartbeat. "Don't think about the geometry. Don't think about the bolt or the alea. Just listen to the water under your board. It will tell you where to go. A massive peak rose up, shifting and wobbling as it hit the uneven reef. In a pool, this wave would be a mistake. Here, it was a masterpiece of complexity. John took off. He didn't just drop in, he seemed to melt into the face of the wave. He did a turn so powerful that it sent a curtain of water 30 feet into the air. Yet his body remained perfectly calm. He wasn't forcing the board. He was responding to the microscopic vibrations of the water. "Your turn, Kai," he shouted, his voice disappearing into the roar. Kai turned. The wave was a chaotic wall of moving energy. She felt the urge to calculate her move, to be precise like Kelly had taught her. But then she remembered John's words. Listen to the pulse. She stopped thinking. She felt the water pushing against the bottom of her board. She felt the slight suction of the reef pulling at the wave. She popped up, and instead of a rigid turn, she let the board chatter over the surface, finding the line of least resistance. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She was observing. She was a passenger on a 3 million-year-old journey of energy. She carved a long, beautiful line that followed the exact contour of the wave's power. The lesson of the pulse. As they paddled back out, the spray from the breaking waves creating rainbows in the air, Kai felt a profound sense of peace. The loop of her anxiety had been replaced by the pulse of the planet. You heard it, John said, with a nod of approval. You stopped trying to be the master, and you became the student. That's where the real power is. Mana isn't something you take. It's something you receive when you're quiet enough to hear it. He looked toward a small, hidden beach further down the coast, where the vibe was less about the big wave and more about the big soul. You have the intuition now, John said, but you're still carrying the weight of expectation. You need to remember why we did this in the first place, before the world titles and the technology. You need to find the joy. He pointed to a figure walking along the sand with a long, flowy style and a smile that seemed to catch the sun. Go find Rob. He'll show you that the best surfer in the water is always the one having the most fun. The vivid, high-stakes energy of the North Shore began to soften into a mellow, golden-brown haze. The roar of the surf turned into the gentle strumming of an acoustic guitar. Chapter 6. SOuL Surfing, Part I, The Rhythm of the Reef. The golden haze, the high-voltage blue of the North Shore, didn't just fade. It mellowed into a warm, sepia-toned afternoon. The air grew heavy, with the scent of burning coconut husks and drying frangipani. The sharp, vertical cliffs were gone, replaced by the gentle, rolling hills of a hidden Indonesian cove. Kai was in the 70s revisited, 2005. The sand was as soft as powdered sugar, and the water was so clear it looked like the boards were hovering in midair above a garden of vibrant coral. In her hands, the board had changed again. It wasn't a sharp, white needle like Kelly's or John John's. It was a twin fin, wider, thicker, painted in shades of sunset orange and deep violet. It felt soft to the touch, built for gliding rather than attacking. The drifter of the tide, walking along the shoreline, his silhouette unmistakable against the low-hanging sun, was a man who moved as if he were walking on water even while on land. His hair was a wild, iconic halo of curls, and his gait was a slow, rhythmic dance. Rob Machado. Rob was the SOuL surfer, a man who had walked away from the frantic loop of the world tour at the height of his career, choosing instead to chase the perfect feeling rather than the perfect score. "You're paddling too fast, Kai," Rob said, his voice a smooth, melodic drawl that felt like a song played on an old wooden guitar. He wasn't looking at the waves. He was watching a small crab make its way across the sand. "I don't want to miss the set," Kai replied, her breath still coming in short, anxious bursts. Rob finally looked up, a gentle, knowing smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "The ocean has been here for 4 billion years, Kai. It's not going anywhere. If you hurry, you're already behind. You're trying to achieve the wave. I just want to be in it." The aesthetics of ease. They paddled out together. Rob didn't use the aggressive, explosive strokes of Lane Beachley. He slipped into the water like a seal, his arms moving in a long, fluid arc. "See that wave?" Rob pointed to a long, peeling left-hander that was curling gracefully over the reef. It wasn't a monster, but it was beautiful. "Most people see a score there. I see a line, a song. Every board has a different melody, Kai, this twin fin. It wants to skate. It wants to flow. It doesn't want to be told what to do. It wants to be invited." He spoke to her about the loop of expectation. He told her about the famous 1995 Pipeline Masters semifinal, the high five with Kelly Slater. "People remember the wave," Rob whispered as they sat in the lineup, the water lapping against their boards. "But I remember the feeling of the sun on my back and the brotherhood in the water. We were competing for a title, sure, but we were really just 2 kids playing in the shore break. The moment you lose the play, you lose the mana. You can have all the skill in the world, but if your heart is heavy with the need to win, you'll never truly fly." The first glide of joy. A wave approached, a shimmering wall of liquid gold. "Don't pop up like a soldier," Rob commanded. "Pop up like you're waking up from a beautiful dream. No tension, no effort, just grace." Kai turned. She felt the board catch. She didn't lunge. She didn't grit her teeth. She simply stood, letting her weight distribute naturally across the wide deck of the twin fin. The board didn't slice, it drifted. She felt a sensation of incredible loose freedom, like sliding on ice. She wasn't carving a deep, aggressive turn. She was drawing a long, lazy S-curve across the face. For the first time, she wasn't thinking about power or adaptability. She was thinking about style. "Beautiful," Rob shouted, gliding alongside her on a parallel line. his hands behind his back in his signature pose of ultimate relaxation. You're not fighting the ocean anymore, Kai. You're finally dancing with it. Chapter 6. Soul Surfing Part II. The Internal Compass. The silence of the solitude. As the tide began to pull out, exposing the jagged tops of the reef, Rob and Kai paddled to a smaller, even more secluded bay. The crowds were miles away. Here, there were no cameras, no judges, no loops of societal pressure. The hardest thing in the world, Kai, Rob said as they sat on their boards in the deepening twilight, is to surf for an audience of one. Yourself. He began to explain the soul surfer philosophy in its deepest form. It wasn't about being lazy. It was about being authentic. When you're in the loop of the world, you're always performing. You're checking your watch, checking your stats, checking your image. But the ocean is the only place where you can be truly invisible. In that invisibility, you find your true self. The girl who found that piece of koa wood on the beach, she didn't want a trophy. She wanted a connection. The resonance of the wood. Rob reached out and touched the rail of Kai's board. You've learned the history from Duke. You've learned the peace from Jerry, the grit from Lane, the evolution from Kelly, and the pulse from John. But all of that is just information until you make it experience. He told her a story about a trip he took to a remote island where no one had ever seen a modern surfboard. He had shared his board with the local children, and he had seen the same spark in their eyes that he had felt as a child in San Diego. That spark is the mana, Rob said. It's the joy of the first glide. Everything else, the sponsorship, the fame, the pressure is just noise. If you can keep that spark alive, you can surf forever. Your body will age, the waves will change, but the joy is eternal. The final ride of the sunset. The sun was now a sliver of fire on the horizon. One last wave came through, a perfect, chest-high runner that seemed to capture all the orange and pink light of the sky. This is the soul wave, Rob said. Take it all the way to the sand. Don't do a single turn. Just feel the glide. Kai dropped in. She stood perfectly still. She felt the water rushing beneath her feet, the cool wind on her face, and the immense, quiet peace of the Indonesian night. She wasn't Kai the student or Kai the seeker. She was just a part of the movement of the planet. As she stepped off onto the sand, the water bubbling around her ankles, she felt a sense of completion. The frantic need to be something had vanished. She was already everything she needed to be. The shift to the giants. Rob stood on the beach, his silhouette fading into the darkness. You found the joy, Kai, he whispered. And that joy will be your anchor. Because where you're going next, the joy is the only thing that will keep the darkness at bay. You've learned to dance in the light. Now, you must learn to stand in the face of the giants. The warm, tropical air began to grow cold. The gentle sound of the acoustic guitar was replaced by a low, terrifying rumble that shook the very foundations of the earth. The scent of plumeria was replaced by the cold, metallic smell of a brewing storm. "Go to the Valley of the Kings," Rob's voice called from the shadows. "Look for the man who doesn't just ride the waves, but who tames the monsters. Look for Laird." Chapter 7. Facing Giants, Part I, The Biological Temple. The arrival at Pe'ahi. The mellow, acoustic vibrations of Rob Machado's cove were obliterated. The transition was violent. Kai didn't just arrive. She was slammed into a new reality. The air was no longer a warm caress. It was a cold, high-velocity wind that tasted of iron and deep ocean salt. She was standing on the jagged, rust-colored cliffs of Maui, Hawaii, the present day. Below her, the Bay of Pe'ahi, known to the world as Jaws, was transforming. A massive winter swell had arrived from the Aleutians. The waves weren't rolling, they were avalanching. Every few minutes, a set would march in walls of water 60 to 80 feet high, moving at 40 miles per hour. When they broke, the explosion was so powerful it sent a shockwave through the basalt cliffs, vibrating in the soles of Kai's feet. In her hands, the board was unlike anything she had ever seen. It wasn't a surfboard in the traditional sense. It was a tow-in board, small, incredibly heavy, weighted with lead to cut through the chop, equipped with foot straps and a foil that looked like an airplane wing. It was a machine built for war. The architect of the self, standing at the edge of the cliff, staring into the abyss with a calm that was almost frightening, was a man who looked less like a surfer and more like a Greek god carved from teak wood. Laird Hamilton. Even at his age, Laird moved with a terrifying efficiency. He wasn't just fit, he was optimized. As Kai approached, she saw him performing a series of intense, rhythmic breathing exercises, pranayama mixed with modern breathwork, his chest expanding like a blacksmith's bellows. "You're shivering, Kai," Laird said. He didn't look at her. His eyes were locked on the horizon, measuring the interval between the sets with the precision of an atomic clock. "Is it the cold, or is it the fear?" "Both," Kai whispered, her voice nearly lost in the roar of the wind. Laird turned. His face was a map of a life lived on the edge, weathered, strong, and utterly uncompromising. "Good. Fear is a biological signal. It tells you that you are alive. The moment you stop feeling it, you're in danger. But if you let it sit in your stomach, it becomes a poison. You have to move it. You have to breathe it out." The alchemy of the body. Laird sat down on a rock, inviting Kai to join him for a moment before the descent. He didn't talk about shredding or stoked. He talked about the temple. "Your body is the only vessel you get for this journey," Laird said, his voice deep and steady. "Most people treat their bodies like a rental car. They run it on cheap fuel. They never change the oil, and they wonder why it breaks down when the storm hits. If you want to face these giants, you have to be a high-performance machine." He spoke to her about his obsession with nutrition and hydration. He told her about the fats, the turmeric, the ginger, and the minerals he used to fuel his cells. To Laird, food wasn't pleasure, it was information. It was the code that allowed his muscles to fire faster and his brain to remain calm when the weight of 10,000 tons of water was chasing him. I don't eat for the taste of 1920 or the vibes of 1970, he said. I eat for the survival of 2026. If your blood is acidic, your mind will be frantic. If your cells are hydrated and your breath is deep, you can find the eye of the storm. You have to be an athlete before you can be a surfer. The yoga of risk. He began to lead Kai through a series of functional yoga movements, not the gentle stretching of a studio, but intense, balance-heavy poses that mimicked the torque of a 60-foot wave. Yoga isn't just about flexibility, Kai, Laird explained as he held a grueling pose. It's about proprioception. It's knowing exactly where every atom of your body is in space, even when you're upside down in a dark, spinning tunnel of water. It's about the nervous system. When Jaws bites, your brain wants to scream panic. Yoga teaches you to say observe. He spoke of the loop of comfort. Most people spend their lives trying to be comfortable, but comfort is the enemy of growth. I seek the uncomfortable. I want to be in the place where I am most challenged, because that is where the truth lives. You don't find your mana in the easy shallows. You find it when you are inches away from the end. Chapter 7. Facing Giants, Part II, The Mind of the Hunter. The Descent into the Mouth. They descended the cliff to where a jet ski was waiting in the churning white water of the channel. The noise was now absolute, a visceral, low-frequency thrum that made Kai's teeth ache. Laird hopped onto the ski with the grace of a panther. Get on, he commanded. We don't paddle into these, we tow. We use the technology to match the speed of the beast. As they accelerated toward the lineup, Kai felt the raw power of the peahi swell. The water was moving so fast it felt like solid concrete. These weren't waves, they were moving hillsides. The mindset, Kai, Laird shouted over the roar of the engine. You have to be a hunter. If you go out there as a victim, the ocean will eat you. You have to decide that you belong on that wave. You have to have the will of the lioness that Lane showed you, but tempered with the calculated precision of Kelly. The Millennium Wave mentality. Laird began to tell her about the year 2000, the Millennium Wave, at Tihupa'o. He described the moment he stood on a wave that everyone thought was a certain death sentence. The whole world thought I was crazy, Laird yelled as the ski skipped over a massive piece of chop. But I had prepared for 20 years for that 1 second. I had done the breath work. I had done the training. I knew my equipment. When that wave pitched, I didn't see a monster. I saw an opportunity to see the face of God. The only thing between me and the end was my will. He looked at Kai, his eyes piercing through her fear. You have the history of the greats in your blood now, but right now, none of that matters. Duke isn't here to hold your hand. John isn't here to read the pulse. It's just you, your breath, and the gravity of the earth. Are you ready to stop being a passenger? The drop into the abyss. A set moved in. It was a black set, waves so large they blocked out the sun. The first wave was a 70-footer. The second was even larger. "This is the one," Laird roared. He swung the jet ski around, the tow rope tightening. Kai gripped the handle, her heart exploding in her chest. The ski accelerated. 20 miles per hour, 30, 40. Kai felt the board begin to plane on its foil. She was flying 6 inches above the water, the metal wing cutting through the turbulence like a knife. "Go," Laird released the rope. Kai was alone. She was at the top of a liquid mountain. The drop was so long she had time to think, time to feel the wind trying to tear her off the board, time to hear the roar of the avalanche behind her. She remembered the biological temple. She breathed deep into her diaphragm, calming her racing heart. She remembered the yoga. She felt the exact position of her feet in the straps. She leaned forward, committing her entire soul to the descent. She reached the bottom. The speed was incomprehensible. She looked up and saw a wall of water 80 feet high, a skyscraper of turquoise and white foam leaning over her. For a second, she felt tiny, a speck of dust. But then she felt the mana. She felt the collective strength of every legend she had met. She carved a turn at 40 miles per hour, the G-force pressing her into the board. She didn't just survive, she commanded the space. She rode out into the channel, her body trembling with a cocktail of adrenaline and pure, unadulterated life. The lesson of the giant. Laird was there on the ski, a look of grim respect on his face. "You didn't blink," he said, nodding. "You mastered the machine, but more importantly, you mastered the animal inside you. You took the fuel of your fear and you turned it into the fire of your action." As the sun began to set over the jagged Maui horizon, the world started to shift one last time. The violent roar of jaws began to fade, replaced by a strange, ethereal hum, a chorus of 1,000 voices. "You faced the giants, Kai," Laird said, his image beginning to dissolve into a brilliant white light. "You've learned that the body is the temple and the mind is the architect. Now, it's time for the final ceremony. All the paths lead to the same place. All the surfers are waiting." "Where am I going?" Kai asked. "To the infinite lineup," Laird's voice echoed. "To the place where the loop finally breaks." Chapter 8. The infinite lineup, the grand integration. The arena, the great convergence. The physical world had dissolved. Kai wasn't just in one place. She was in the source. The arena was a geographical impossibility. A bay where the volcanic black sands of Tahiti met the white powder of Waikiki, framed by the red cliffs of Australia and the emerald peaks of Kauai. The sound was a symphony of the world's oceans. The deep, tectonic boom of Tihupao's reef mixed with the high-pitched hiss of the Mediterranean and the rhythmic crack of the Atlantic. There were no plastic flags or metal bleachers. The referees were the elements themselves. An old sea turtle surfaced to mark the peak, and a pair of albatrosses circled above, their wings cutting the air with a whistling sound that signaled the start of the final heat. One, the heart of Hawaii, Duke Kahanemoku. Duke sat at the point, the place where the first ripples of energy arrived. The vibe was solid gold. The sound was the steady, heartbeat-like thrum of a large wooden drum. Welcome home, Kai, Duke's voice was like the sound of a calm tide. He represented the foundation, the belief that the ocean is a sanctuary, not a stadium. He sat on an olo board that smelled of ancient forests and kukui oil. He was the anchor of the soul. 2. The Indonesian dream, Jerry Lopez. 10 yards further out, where the wave began to wall up into a perfect cylinder, was Jerry. The vibe was indigo zen. The sound was a single, sustained note from a Tibetan singing bowl. Jerry sat in the impact zone with a tranquility that defied physics. He represented the transition from strength to grace. The tube is a hallway between worlds, Kai, he whispered. Walk through it with a quiet heart. 3. The Australian grit, Lane Beachley, where the wave hit the bowl and grew into a vertical wall of power. Lane was waiting. The vibe was electric orange. The sound was the raw, distorted growl of an electric guitar echoing off the limestone cliffs of Bell's Beach. Don't you dare hesitate, she shouted, her voice cutting through the spray. She represented the fire, the refusal to let any loop of society define her limits. 4. The scientific peak, Kelly Slater. In the most technical section of the wave, where the water moved with the fastest frequency, sat Kelly. The vibe was silver precision. The sound was a rhythmic, high-tech pulse, the ping of a sonar. Kelly wasn't just sitting. He was observing the microvortices in the water. Adapt or fade, Kai, he said, his eyes scanning the horizon for the next shift in the code. He was the bridge to the future. 5. The North Shore intuition, John Florence. Further out in the wild, where the current was strongest, was John. The vibe was deep cobalt. The sound was the whistling wind and the cry of the iwa bird. He sat in a state of hyper-awareness, his body vibrating with the pulse of the reef. The ocean isn't outside of you, he said softly. It's the blood in your veins. He was the master of the unseen. 6. The California glide, Rob Machado. In the playground section, where the waves slowed down and invited creativity, was Rob. The vibe was honey amber. The sound was an acoustic folk melody, light and breezy. He was doing a hand jive with the water, his board drifting effortlessly. The best surfer is the one who finds the rhythm of the joy, he laughed. He was the guardian of the spirit. 7. The Titan of Maui, Laird Hamilton. Way out past the second reef, where the monsters lived, Laird stood on his foil. The vibe was titanium gray. The sound was the thunder of an avalanche. He was the sentinel, the man who tamed the giants. "Your fear is your fuel," he roared. "Burn it and be free." Ate the trickster, Sterling Spencer. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a ridiculous sound, a rubber duck squeaking. Sterling Spencer paddled into the middle of the legends, wearing a crown made of driftwood. The vibe was neon pink. "I just checked the scores," Sterling announced with a wink. "The referees that Turtle and the Bird say I'm winning by 1,000,000,000 points because my hair looks the best in the spray. Relax, everyone. It's just water." The laughter that followed was the medicine. Sterling brought the most important element, the ability to not take the sovereignty too seriously. He reminded Kai that the loop can be broken with a joke. 9. The French powerhouse, Johann de Fay. Sitting at the most critical takeoff spot was Johann de Fay. The vibe was island strength. The sound was the rhythmic slap of the Indian Ocean hitting the rocks of Reunion Island. Johann represented the modern woman, strong, humble, and incredibly powerful. Her surfing was a clean line through a messy world. "Take the peak, Kai," she said, her voice steady and encouraging. "You've earned the priority." 10. The Queen of Nazaré, Justine Dupont. And there, on a wave that looked like a moving skyscraper of white foam, was Justine. The vibe was ice white and midnight blue. The sound was the deafening crack of a mountain collapsing. Justine moved with a courage that was quiet and absolute. She represented the ultimate frontier, the woman who had conquered the dark loop of fear. She nodded to Kai, a silent acknowledgement between warriors. The horizon is only a limit if you stop paddling. The final ride, the integration, the sea turtle referee dove deep. The albatrosses let out a piercing cry. The set of a lifetime approached, a wave that carried the DNA of every ocean Kai had visited. "Go," all the legends shouted at once. Kai turned. She didn't feel the weight of the koa, the needle of the bolt, or the machine of the foil. She felt a total integration. As she dropped in, she heard Duke's aloha in her heartbeat, Jerry's silence in her breath, Lane's will in her legs, Kelly's precision in her rail, John's pulse in her intuition, Rob's joy in her style, Laird's courage in her soul, Sterling's laughter in her mind, Johann and Justine's power in her stance. She entered a tube that lasted for an eternity. Inside, she saw the loop of her life, all the routines, the doubts, and the walls shatter into 1,000,000 sparkling diamonds of sea spray. She emerged into a world of pure light, a place where the journey and the destination were the same thing.